cash for social care, but you'll pay it through higher council tax. Local government will get the green light tomorrow for a 6% rise. It prompts sharp exchanges in the Commons.
The crisis is made in Downing Street by this government.
13 years and no action whatsoever.
Also this lunchtime in Syria, empty buses and empty promises. Aleppo's ceasefire collapses within hours, with airstrikes and more casualties. A major review of school funding cuts for some, admit ministers, but more for the most in need. And when means turn mean, the woman being mocked on social media hits back at bullies.
Memes can be funny. Memes can be cool. But the memes that hurt other people aren't cool.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Alistair Stewart.
Good afternoon. They may not be in A&E, but the elderly and disabled in need of long-term social care are among the most vulnerable. Tomorrow, councils in England will be told they can up council tax by 6% over the next 2 years. Labour's Jeremy Corbyn said that wasn't good enough in dealing with what he called a crisis for those in need and for the NHS. Mrs May acknowledged there was an immediate problem and pledged a long-term solution, but she said Labour had had 13 years in government and had done nothing. Our political correspondent Libby Vina has the details.
How to protect the elderly from poverty and neglect. Labour has been on the offensive this week, demanding a better deal on social care. Today it emerged the government will, after all, allow local authorities to raise council tax, although not by much. Theresa May headed off to Prime Minister's questions to face an angry Jeremy Corbyn, demanding she do more.
This is a social care system that's deep in crisis. The crisis is made in Downing Street by this government. This social care crisis forces people to give up work to care for loved ones because there isn't a system to do it. Get a grip and fund it properly, please.
The issue of social care is indeed one that has been ducked by governments for too long. That is why it is this government that will provide a long-term, sustainable system for social care that gives reassurance to people. But when he talks about governments ducking social care, let's look about 13 years of Labour in government. 13 years and no action whatsoever.
But for now, the only action this government is promising is a rise in council tax. For an average Band D property, council tax was just under £1,500 in 2010. Last year, councils were allowed to put up bills by 2%, an increase of around £22 on the same property. If councils now increase bills by, say, 6% over 2 years, it could mean a rise of more than £120 per home. Social care providers say it will only be a short-term fix that doesn't begin to address the problems facing the sector.
It's not going to be a long-term solution. So having taken this step, what now needs to happen is that all of the political parties need to come together, in our view, through an independent commission, to provide a long-term solution that gets this right.
But political consensus on this issue still seems elusive. Well, the council tax rises due to be formally announced tomorrow were less than expected. But what has gone up dramatically this lunchtime are the political stakes. Theresa May effectively saying that she wouldn't duck this issue. Many people believe that involves injecting a lot more cash from central government, and it's very hard to see where that would come from.
Libby, thank you. The ceasefire in Aleppo has collapsed. Shelling and airstrikes have resumed in the east of the city, where the last remnants of resistance is holed up. It's halted the planned evacuation of people trapped as government forces moved in. Earlier today, a line of buses that was to get ordinary residents and fighters out departed without any passengers. Those left behind now have no way of getting out. Rebecca Barry with the latest.
The very worst kind of wake-up call. in eastern Aleppo this morning. There's meant to be a ceasefire in place here, but today the heavy shelling continued. And Syrian activists say aircraft have resumed bombing rebel-held areas of the city.
Criminal Assad regime and the Iranian have broke the ceasefire and they were back to attack the civilians and to continue the genocide. Civilians are stuck again in the city.
There is a families here.
We spoke to one resident who's desperate to escape with his 5-month-old baby.
I have a family. I have a baby boy, 5 months, still here. We want to just evacuate out of the city to safe place.
These buses were supposed to be taking rebel fighters and civilians out of the besieged city, but they sit empty. Their engines are running, but there's no sign of the promised evacuation taking place anytime soon.
Ради осуществления определенного плана.
But in an interview with Russian state TV, President Assad remained defiant, saying Western governments seem to care more about saving terrorists than civilians. And the plight of civilians here is desperate. These families are searching for food and supplies in a building recently abandoned by a militant group, taking as much as they can, as quickly as they can. There is no milk, there's no meat, says this woman. They forbid us from everything. And while the fighting goes on, the chances of the thousands of civilians trapped here getting out safely continue to diminish. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
Well, watching those images with me live in the studio is Hamish de Bretton Gordon, a former commanding officer in the British Army. In recent years, he's been helping to advise doctors inside Aleppo. You and I were just watching those images, the latest images. Back to square one?
Well, I hope not. I was speaking to our people, the OSAM and Doctor Under Fire people in Aleppo earlier today. They were very disappointed that they couldn't get out. We had all the buses and the trucks ready with the UN to bus them out north to the Castella Road and to our main hospital, Babaha, in Idlib. And it's the Iranian militias that are stopping them. And then the ceasefire seems to have broken.
There were very dramatic moments in the House of Commons yesterday where the Foreign Secretary was beating himself up over inaction here, and former Chancellor of the Exchequer George Osborne ditto. Is there practically anything that the UK government, the UK armed forces could be doing?
Well, I think there is. And I think that vote that the Foreign Secretary mentioned in 2013, you know, we're all guilty for that. Had we destroyed Syria's air force on the ground then, we would not be in this position. But I think, and I've been very strongly urging that the British government does help us get these 500 children that Dr. David Knott and I have been trying to get out. Give us some sort of air cover so that when we get them out, they're then not destroyed on the ground by other jets, so that we can get them to the relative safety and get the injured out and give some hope to those 100,000 people who are stuck in Aleppo, who, if we don't help them, could well die over this Christmas.
And one of your personal concerns, and you've developed a degree of expertise in it, is the threat and use of chemical weapons. Is there further evidence of that as we look at this impasse?
Well, very much so. And that goes back to the red line crossing when we didn't punish Assad. So 17 of the last 19 days, multiple chlorine barrel bombs have been dropped in Aleppo, forcing the children out of the cellars. They've then been blown apart by high explosives. And only yesterday, there was reports of a major sarin attack in Hama, killing up to 101 people, still alleged. But that is, and not having punished and not having stuck to that red line, chemical weapons, the great taboo, is now widely used around the world.
Hamish de Bretton Gordon, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Joining us live now from Aleppo is Dan Rivers. Dan, what's the latest that you can tell us from the ground right now?
Well, I am watching, as I speak to you, Alistair, heavy shelling of that tiny remaining rebel enclave. We've been seeing huge plumes of smoke and flashes as shells slam into buildings to the far west of the city in this remaining enclave. We've also been hearing jets circling over the city and the retort of large airstrikes as well. So any semblance of this ceasefire is clearly breaking down and has been for a good couple of hours here. We've had a bit of a sense from the Syrian military of where they're at. They're saying that essentially there are far more rebels than they anticipated, that they are being told that there were also families of rebels. So they were trying to paint this morning as a sort of logistical problem that they were having, that they were far more than they had catered for. We were down at the road where they were supposed to come out, and we saw the buses, 33 buses, waiting to take the rebels at 5 o'clock this morning. No one came out. But I think there behind the scenes is probably something more fundamental going on in terms of the discussions about whether the rebels can come out armed, whether they're allowed to bring ammunition out with them, and arguments between the powers behind the deal, Russia and Iran and Turkey, who, when they seem to have come so close to negotiating a way out for the people and rebels, now that seems to have broken down, certainly for the time being.
Dan Rivers live in Aleppo. Thank you. Here, the Education Secretary has promised schools in England will receive equal funding in future, and there will be an end to the system which she claims is currently unfair to pupils. The Department for Education needs to find savings of £3 billion by 2020. A report from the National Audit Office said there could be significant risks in making those spending cuts. Helena Carter has more.
Putting on a confident front this morning, but behind the scenes, concerns for pupils across the country are growing. And it's thanks to this announcement in Parliament today.
Our school funding system, as it exists today, is unfair, it's opaque and it's outdated. So firstly, we're proposing a consistent base rate for every pupil at primary and at secondary, which steadily increases in value as they progress through the system.
Despite claims to restore fairness to the funding system, this proposed funding formula will see state schools in England having to find £3 billion of savings by 2020.
If you don't put more money in, you end up going backwards, and that's what's happening here. With more pupils coming into the system, with costs going across the board, up and up and up, especially in recruitment, we are ultimately going to have less money per head, per pupil, lower standards.
The Department of Education say savings can be made while maintaining high standards, but it's not without its risks.
The department is looking to schools to make savings in areas such as the procurement of back office functions and energy, but a significant proportion of the savings are also expected to come from how schools use their workforce, and clearly that's absolutely crucial to get that right.
But exactly how schools are going to get it right is a question yet to be answered. Helena Carter, ITV News.
A former football coach has appeared in court charged with 8 counts of child sex offences. Barry Burnell, the former coach with Crewe Alexandra, appeared via video link at South Cheshire Magistrates Court. He's the first former coach to be charged since recent revelations about sex abuse in football. Well, our correspondent Ben Chapman was in court. Ben, take us through what happened.
Well, Barry Burnell appeared frail and seemed to struggle to get in and out of his chair as he appeared here on a video link at this very short hearing, only about 15 minutes or so. Now, Barry Burnell is a former youth football coach and scout who throughout the 1980s was associated with a number of clubs in the Northwest and the Midlands, including Crewe Alexandra, Stoke City and Manchester City. And it is in relation to this period that he is charged with these 8 offences, these 8 sexual offences, all against the same boy who was aged between 11 and 15 at the time. The offences are alleged to have been carried out between 1981 and 1985 and in various locations, in Furness Vale in Derbyshire, in Nantwich in Cheshire, at a Butlins holiday camp, and one offence in a car. Now, Barry Burnell shook his head as the detail of these charges was read to the court here this morning. He only spoke a few times to confirm his name, his address and his date of birth, and the court was told that his defence team have given no indication yet as to whether he's likely to plead guilty or not guilty. He was remanded in custody and he'll appear in court again early in the new year.
Ben, thank you. Still to come, we hear from the woman who says people sharing her photo on social media are cruel bullies. But first, ITV News has learned that more than 1 million days of police officers' time has been lost over the past 3 years because of mental ill health across 27 forces. The new figures obtained through Freedom of Information requests raise serious questions about the support offered to officers expected to deal with traumatic situations. Well, Sejal Carrier has been investigating and she joins me live in the studio now. A growing problem for serving police officers.
Yes. What these figures show is that mental ill health is widespread among the police service. In recent years, we've heard about how this issue affects ex-servicemen and women in the armed forces who've seen and experienced the horrors of war. But frontline officers deal with relentless and ongoing trauma every day for years, but their tour of duty essentially never comes to an end. And it's an issue that has not been recognised so far, they feel. For example, an officer might deal with a suicide on a Monday, a murder on a Tuesday, a child abuse case on a Wednesday, and so it goes on. I've been speaking to a British Transport police officer, a former British Transport police officer, Gary Hayes, who's dealt with countless fatalities during his time, and he remembers one story of a man who had taken his own life and how he delivered that message to his wife and 3 children just before Christmas.
You know, you've got 3 young children, and the last thing they expect to see at Christmas is a policeman at the front door, because as they run into the door, I could hear them, "Oh, Mummy, Daddy's home." And you just think, right, take a deep breath, get yourself together, but you can't. It's just the hardest thing. There's no real input during your training process to get your head around that.
Are problems like that, mental health generally, recognised within the leadership of the police service?
Well, there is a stigma that is deeply embedded in the culture of the police service. The Liberal Democrats who obtained these FOI figures are calling for parity in funding between mental health services and physical health. The Home Office say they've allocated £1.5 million to the mental health charity Mind to deal with a programme that helps people in this situation. But many officers just want to be diagnosed and treated more quickly.
Sejal, thank you. Today's talks to try and resolve the Southern Rail drivers' strike appear on the verge of collapse after the leader of one of the unions involved claims that he was told he wasn't welcome. The RMT's Mick Cash arrived at the conciliation service ACAS this morning alongside representatives from the drivers' ASLEF union and Southern Rail. He says he was told he wasn't able to take part. The walkout has seen journeys disrupted for hundreds of thousands of people across the southeast. Well, this was London's Victoria station at rush hour, usually quiet, with stranded commuters unable to get into the city for a second day in a row. Millions of households are paying more than they need for their energy because they are stuck on their supplier's most expensive tariff. Figures released by the regulator, Ofgem, have revealed that almost 3/4 of British gas customers could save more than £100 a year just by switching to a cheaper deal with the same supplier. Our business editor, Joel Hills, joins me live. We've known for quite some time that this is possible, but I mean, this is a real wake-up call.
Oh, goodness, Alistair, come on, let's be honest about this. The savings are enormous, they're well advertised, and yet a lot of consumers seem either too lazy or too confused to actually pursue them. This morning, the regulator, Ofgem, has been spelling out what's at stake here again. 20 million people sitting on standard variable tariffs, often the most expensive. At British Gas, let's have a look at what's at stake here. 6.6 million people currently paying just over £1,000 a year. They could be saving £174 a year up to if they either switch tariff or go to British Gas's rival. If we take a look now at SSE, currently there are 3.8 million people paying over £1,000 a year. They could save up to £198 a year by either switching tariff or supplier.
Just letting that one reveal. There it is.
I think today's data is a really important development because I think it really shines a light on how many people with the big companies are stuck on these expensive standard variable tariffs. But we do think that the suppliers should voluntarily do more to help their vulnerable low-income customers get off these expensive deals.
Alistair, the energy companies think that any allegations of unfairness are not true, that a record number of people switched last year. The government, though, does seem on the verge of taking more radical action.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Joel. Memes now flood social media. They're pictures that contain text and they are shared online to provide a laugh or two to your Facebook friends. But there has been a backlash to one of the trends which mocks how some people look. One woman whose image was used says that the fad is cruel and is urging social media users to think twice before clicking share. Suzanne Verdi has the story.
It was this mocking meme that saw one woman decide to hit back. This is a photo of Lizzie Velasquez. The caption cruelly reads, "Michael said he would meet me behind this tree for a bit of fun. He's running late. Would someone please tag him and tell him I'm still waiting?" But this time, they picked on the wrong person. Lizzie is a motivational speaker and decided to use her fame to shame those who laughed at her looks. She wrote on Facebook, "At the time, you might find it hilarious, but the human in the photo is probably feeling the exact opposite." She then took to YouTube.
I don't know who decided this was going to be a trend, but those are humans who are being made fun of, and it's not fair.
Lizzie suffers from a rare disease which means her body doesn't store fat and which affects her physical appearance. Every day, thousands of new memes are posted on social media. Most make fun at others' expense. It started out as harmless fun, but now the trend for tagging social media friends with memes has become mean. Lizzie hopes her public plea will make people think twice before posting and sharing the images that poke fun at others' expense. Suzanne Verdi, ITV News.
Think before you click. We're back at 6:30. Bye-bye.